that good, huh? All right. 3-day weekend. I see lots of folks took advantage of it. Just as we kind of mentioned earlier, like, I don't know if you guys know this, but Alex got evacuated. I was just asking Ashley. Edwin got called out because he works for the gas company. And so keep the folks and the situation in Garden Grove, keep that in prayer and for how it affects us and others. I saw a post on Instagram where one of the pastors from West Grove, they had to cancel their whole service. And just, yeah. As this impacts, I remember back a year and a half ago when everything was happening out in Palisades and all that, and all the friends I have out there that were impacted. And so let's just remember to keep them in prayer. We already did that, but I would just encourage you to do that. Esther chapter 6 is where we're headed today. As you turn there, as you prepare, remember, at the end of the message, like Pastor Amati said, our goal is to answer just one question, really. What is it that you heard today that you want to apply to your life this week? What's one tangible thing you can apply this week, an action you can take, something that you can do to draw nearer to God through this? Kids, you have 5 questions to answer today, and as always, 8 completed handouts will get you a gift. You earned it. Don't miss out. We are bribing you to be in God's Word, so I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. So many people, I would say maybe not all of us, but probably most of us, have a tendency to question God's goodness. Maybe we don't say it out loud, but question God's goodness when hard things, tragic things happen. When we lose a loved one, when we lose a pregnancy, when we struggle through a circumstance. Sometimes we question God's goodness in those moments. Maybe it's internal, maybe we never verbalize it, but we begin to ask, okay, where is God in this? Is God still good? Now, we're not even-handed. We are not equally championing, believing, celebrating God when the good things happen. Right? When something goes right, we're not as quick to give God credit. Sometimes we do. But in those moments of struggle, it is important to remember who God is and to understand God's character even when we can't see Him. And so today, our message title is just God's character or trust in God's character, but I've used trust a lot, so I'm just going to kind of just say this. Here's the main idea today. Here's the main call to action. If we can put that slide up. Trust God's character even when you cannot see what He is doing. This is the opposite of trusting our circumstances. This is anything but trusting our own reason. This is placing trust in God's character, who God is immutably. Immutably means unchangingly. And in God's character we can trust. So trust God's character when you cannot see what He's doing. Today I'm going to define 3 character traits. Amauti had them in his prayer. You're going to hear them in a minute. And let those 3 character traits encourage us in challenging times. So Esther chapter 6 is where we're at. If you want to borrow a Bible, I can get you there really quick. It's on page 413, but I would encourage you, follow along in something that has paper, not your phone. Verse 1, on that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So clearly, we're diving in the middle of a story. That's like walking in and like 3/5 of the movie is over, right? So we're diving in deep to the middle. So here's where we are. Esther has been taken into a harem and then made queen. Mordecai uncovered an assassination plot and saved the king's life. Lots has happened, right? Haman has risen to power and now hates Mordecai because Mordecai won't bow down to him. Haman manipulated the king into approving the destruction of all the Jewish people. Esther risks her life in going to the king and now invites the king and Haman to a banquet. Haman left that first part of the banquet full of pride and then built gallows to hang Mordecai on. So we're in the thick of it, right? Esther's in this place where she's trying to bring this up to the king. She's been wisely and patiently waiting. Mordecai knows that not just him and Esther, but all of the people, all of the Jews are going to be annihilated. Because this edict, this unchangeable law, can't even be changed by God. By the king. Okay, by the king. God's good, king not so much. Okay, there we go. So, unchangeable edict has been given out. And is for the destruction of God's wayward, disobedient people in exile, right? They've been in exile now for well over 100 years, and there's this moment where they're beginning to ask the question, okay, if we are going to survive this, where's God? Esther 6 opens up with these simple words, 3 simple words, on that night, right? On the night that Mordecai appeared forgotten for what he had done for the king, on the night that Haman thought he had won, the night before Mordecai was supposed to be executed, on that night. Now, how would you be acting if you were Esther or Mordecai? Would you think God had forgotten you? Where would you be in that? Like this, we're hours away from Haman getting his way, and he's won. Mordecai is about to be executed. Esther is queen, but she has not been able to intervene on behalf of her people yet. Situationally, things don't look good. Let's reread verse 1 again. On that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So, kids, if you're here and you're doing this, first question, what are the Chronicles? Much like our biblical books called 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Chronicles are written historical records, like history books. The king is reading the history of his people, the Persian history books. They're all telling the story about his reign as king. So Chronicles are history books. The Chronicles in the Bible are the history of Israel and Judah. That's not what he's reading. He's reading the history of Persia, his people. And it says, on that night he could not sleep. Now, one more thing as we get in today's text. There's a lot of details that we're going to see that feel coincidental, right? And when we see these things, we typically just keep going. We just see them as facts that kind of are sprinkled in, and we see them, and we don't give them a lot of attention, but all of those details and those things add up to some really cool stuff, and we're just like, wow, that worked out pretty well. But in fact, they're actually orchestrated by God. And the author of Esther is putting those little breadcrumbs, if you will, along the way that we will follow this pathway and understand what God is doing in the shadows or behind the scenes. And so what does that matter to us? Well, when we're struggling, we also want to see the things that God is doing, even the little things that help kind of get us to the place where God ultimately works in, through, or for us. Let's keep reading, see how that works out. Verse 2, and it was found written how Mordecai had told Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Right? So the very night before Mordecai is to be hanged by Haman, the king stumbles across the story of Mordecai, who's about to get hanged in the morning, who stumbles across the story of Mordecai saving his life. Imagine that, right? Let's keep reading. Verse 3. And the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? The king's young men who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. So a king says, a man saved my life, and I didn't do anything to say thank you or honor him, and we're just finding this out now? Coincidence? Maybe. Verse 4, and the king said, who is in the court? Now, Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, Haman is there, standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. The king asked, who's here that I can consult with? Well, imagine that. Haman, your trusted, he just walked in. It is amazing. You see what the author of Esther is doing for us, right? You have a sleepless king, a forgotten act of faithfulness, that exact page being read, Haman entering the court at that exact time. Now listen, if you're Mordecai, and this is the moment he's going to come in, get permission, and hang him. If you're Haman, you're a couple steps away from getting the one thing you want most. This guy who's been such a pain in your you-know-what, and you're going to hang him 50 cubits high. That's 75 feet in the air. You think you've won. God may not come on our time, but he is definitely not late. Right? Let's keep reading verse 6. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Kids, here's your second question. What sin of Haman's from last week shows up again this week? Well, his pride, right? He thinks the king wants to honor him. He literally hears this question and he's like, this has got to be about me, because I'm the man, right? I am that guy. And the king has finally figured it out, right? I keep waiting for my wife to have this moment right here. Like, just figure it out, like, I'm that guy, right? But still, she keeps me humble. So what do we know about the king? The king constantly depends on advisors to guide his decisions. Well, what do we know about Haman? Besides hating Mordecai, he is deeply prideful, right? Who better for the king to ask, right? Do you see how God orchestrates everything down to the last detail? Let's see how this all unfolds. Verse 7, and Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So the king asked Haman, Haman, what should I do for someone I really, really want to honor? Haman's like, I'm the man. Let him get a robe that's the king's, and a crown that's the king, and a horse that's the king's, and let one of his trusted advisors just parade him around town saying, he the man, right? This is the guy. This is who the king really thinks is a good dude. Let that happen. Because you know Haman's sitting there like, what do I want? Right? I just got like kind of green light for whatever I want for my birthday, and I want this. And so he paints this picture. Verse 10, then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave nothing out that you have mentioned. Haman came to request Mordecai's hanging and is leaving, parading him around town. Just sit on that for a second, right? Like, let that sit in for a minute, right? This huge reversal, right? Verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse, and you said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave nothing out that you've mentioned. Kids, I edited question number 3. This is the last one. Normally I only give you 2, but I'm going to give you this one. Why is this first great reversal so important to the story? Well, the reason I edited it is there's going to be 3 really big ones today. And these great reversals all serve a very similar purpose. God is taking one thing and upending it, right? He's taking it and just like flipping it. Mordecai, at the beginning of this, is about to get hanged in the public square. And Haman, he is the man. He's number 2 in charge of all Persia. He is the king's most trusted advisor. And he's coming in to execute Mordecai. And God flips it. We're going to see 3 of these today, where God flips it. But here's Here's what's so important about it. And kids, here's the point of the question. God is beginning to overturn evil against his people. And we're going to see this in these 3 successive reversals. Verse 11. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai, and he led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." I imagine Mordecai's level of enthusiasm is probably matched by Jonah preaching in Nineveh. Right? The worst gospel presentation ever. Like, repent or God's going to send you to hell. And that's it. That's all Jonah does, right? That's how I imagine Mordecai doing this, right? He cannot believe he's here. How did we get here? I thought I had this buttoned up. You've heard the saying that pride comes before a fall, right? That's a biblical reference to Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. So here's the situation, right? Haman has been prideful, fully setting himself up for this. Had he been a humble man all along, we'd have no issue with Mordecai. We'd have no edict against the Jews. And if he had to do this, he'd do it to whatever. But his pride is eating him up right now. But on the other side, Mordecai's been pretty humble. Mordecai got overlooked. At the end of chapter 2, Mordecai uncovers a plot, if you weren't here, where people are going to assassinate the king. He uncovers that plot, and he sends word, and the king finds out. The king gets the word, and he tests this, and he figures out it's true. He investigates it. It's true, literally saving the king's life, and nothing happens for Mordecai. Even in our culture, we honor stuff like that. Persian culture, is like that 10x, right? Like, they go out of their way to honor people. And this one's just been missed. There's another proverb. Proverbs 16:9, the heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Right? This is how Mordecai has been kind of living and being like, God's in charge. We don't see a lot of faith in him. We see a lot of cultural things. We saw that chapters 3 and 4. We see him more doing kind of what you do, kind of going through the motions. But he is living this way. And God is honoring that. So how do we respond when we're overlooked? Can we continue obeying God when nobody notices it? Can we continue serving faithfully when someone else gets honored and we don't? Can we trust God when righteousness appears to be forgotten? What about when ministry seems fruitless? All we want to do is quit. When marriage is painful and loving one another is a challenge. When parenting our kids and they just don't seem to be getting it. When work just seems like labor and it's no longer a joy. When life is filled with suffering and there's no relief in sight. Or when we pray for long seasons and all we have is unanswered prayer. So God's omnipresence. Here's this first character trait, omnipresence, right? Omni means all present. So all presence, right? All present. God's omnipresence means there is no place where his presence, awareness, or care are absent. There is no place where God's presence, care, or awareness is absent. God is omnipresent, all places, all times. Let's read verse 11 again. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai, and he led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Mordecai's faithfulness had not been ignored by God. It had been delayed by God. God wasn't just present with Mordecai in his delay. God was at work through it. The king might have missed it. God didn't miss it. Because God is always present, he is always actively aware and involved. So point number 1 today, God is omnipresent. Trust God when your faithfulness seems unnoticed. God is there when you're overlooked. God doesn't miss a thing. People may not see you, but God does. So trust God when your faithfulness seems unnoticed. Many of you have probably heard about the Dutch Christian Holocaust survivor, Corrie ten Boom. She famously spoke of and wrote about and taught to people she was around this question of why not me, right? And where it came from is people are like, okay, so she again, as a Holocaust survivor, you can imagine the stories, right? Any of the stories you know, but rather than asking why me, because people like just asked her, didn't you wonder and ask God at times, like, why me? And she says, no, I learned to ask the question, why not me? Why not me? Instead of saying, why me, why not me? And she gives three really good reasons. One is embracing the reality that we live in a fallen world. So instead of asking, why me, which implies somehow we deserve an easy, pain-free life, but by asking, why not me, we're embracing the reality that all Christians must face hardships because we live in a broken world. So why not me? Number two, she said, because she would identify with Christ. She taught that since Jesus suffered so profoundly for humanity's sake, that his followers, like us, should not be shocked when we are called to suffer as well. So why not me? Her third reason is a life ready for eternity. She said she would rather it be her and her loved ones who were ready to meet Jesus at any moment to endure the hardships rather than anyone who didn't know Christ. So when we find ourselves in that place of saying, okay, why me? Why am I going through this? Corrie ten Boom, who went through, I'm just going to put it out there, more than any of us, because she literally survived the Holocaust. I'm going to say that gives her a pass today. Why not me? Why not me? Back in our story, verse 12. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. So we get to a new scene here. Mordecai seems unfazed, either by being overlooked or by being honored. He doesn't seem to do much. He keeps going back to the gate. That's just kind of where his job is. That's what he does, right? Haman goes home in shame with his ego destroyed. And then the world moves on around them. Verse 13. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai before whom you have begun to fall is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Haman's mortified. He goes home. His pride is shattered. He goes home in mourning and humiliation, and he tells his wife and his friends what happened. I can just hear the venting. It's like any one of us who get home and just, blah, blah, blah. You just hear it, right? Like, this is the worst day of my life. Here's what happened. I was going there for this. That didn't work. And then this happened. But his wife and his friends, his advisors, they say something incredibly prophetic. They don't know it, and they don't know why. But they're like, okay, if Mordecai's a Jew, and it's not going to work. Like, if that's who you're going after, and just this one guy just got honored by the king, and your thing is to eliminate all the Jewish people in Persia, it'll not come true. Now, they don't know why. They don't know that God has made a promise to save a remnant of these people and return them to their land. And then when they return to their land, there will be 400 years of silence. That 400 years of silence will get us to John the Baptist, who will get us to Jesus and point to Jesus and say, that's the one we've been waiting for thousands of years. They don't know the story, and they don't know that God is on their side. They just see the writing. They just see the details. They just see what's happening and like, yeah, this isn't a fight you can win. This isn't just friends and relatives saying something cliche, but rather they can see what's taking place. Something Haman cannot see himself. Sometimes we just need perspective. We need those around us who will say the hard things to us. And our pride say we need to be corrected. Or in our pain, comfort us or in our trial encourage us. Sometimes we just need others to speak into our lives true things, hard things, but godly things. Well, how do we see this in this passage so long ago, 2,500 years ago? How do we see Christ in this? And we see Mordecai here just on the receiving end of a lot of negative things. He's just been humbled. The Jewish people are under persecution. We see this, and then we see him elevated. And it's just, this is really the story of Jesus. This is Jesus humbling himself, becoming flesh, entering into human history because humanity has rejected God and become sinful and so broken, we're incapable of fixing our problem. And so, knowing we couldn't get to God, God comes to us in Christ, and Jesus humbly is entered into the flesh, so God in all his glory becomes flesh and a human being. And then Jesus lives the life that you and I are called to live, but we choose not to. He lives it faithfully. He is persecuted. He is oppressed. He is opposed by his own people. He's, at times, even by his family, like, oh, I think he's going a little crazy. But Jesus stays the course, humbly, takes his place there on the cross, dying for our sin, paying our penalty. The penalty we deserve that he did not, he takes for us. To be our substitute, to be our payment. He does this. And then he is laid in a ground. The creator, the author of life, the very word that spoke life, is laid in a grave. You can't get any humbler than that. You can't fall any further from being life to dying. I still can't comprehend how the author of life can die. But there's Jesus laid in a grave. But it doesn't end there. See, the story continues, and Jesus resurrects 3 days later, giving us new life. Jesus ascends to the Father where he is king, where he reigns, where we sing songs to him out of praise and adoration today. And this story is a story of humility and oppression and opposition and pain and struggle and turmoil and suffering. It's a story of that being raised up by God. And so we see our story like Corrie ten Boom, like if that happened to Jesus, why would it not happen to us? In Isaiah 53, the famous passage in the Old Testament, 800 years before Jesus accomplished it for us, it says, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Jesus was made low to lift us up. Jesus became low to reverse us. He was where he needed to be, but we weren't. So Jesus humbled himself to raise us up to him. The greatest reversal is not this story. The greatest reversal is not even as we close out the book next week when the people of God are delivered and they're celebrated. It's not that. The greatest reversal is that we can be lifted back up to God because of Jesus. Verse 14, back to our story. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. So we're in the middle of these feasts. We heard about it last week, right? Where the queen goes and risks her life in front of the king because she couldn't just show up. So she does. He holds out the scepter to her, allowing her to enter. She comes in. He says, "What do you want? And how can I help you? Anything you want." And she says, "Well, let me throw a feast for you and Haman." Right? And that feast goes really well. And at the end of it, again, he asks her, "What is your wish? What is your request? How can I help you?" She says, "Well, if I've pleased you, then come back one more time. Let's do it again tomorrow." Well, it's now tomorrow. It's tomorrow. That time is here. Esther's prepared this next feast, this banquet, this thing for Haman and for the king. And so now, here we are. Esther 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther?" it shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. So again, the third time King Ahasuerus, historically known as Xerxes, has asked for her wish and her request. It's a way of going over and above, like, what do you really want, and what are you asking me to do? Like, there's two pieces to this. And he asked her all three times the same way. Here's her answer, verse 3. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. There's more to this, but it is an important point to notice that she hopes she can live. But her ask, the thing that she knows, okay, he said he's going to say yes to me, to whatever I ask, so this is my ask. Save my people. She places the people above herself. So if you haven't been here, the entire book of Esther has brought us to this place where the tension between Haman and Mordecai has been building. It escalates to this boiling point. And Haman's plan, he deceptively comes in and he manipulates the king into saying yes to something without details. And he told him that an entire race of people were undermining the kingdom, but he didn't say which people. And so the king approved a plan that he didn't really understand. Now, that's the king's fault, but he does it. And he literally gives Haman the ring to seal it as if he wrote it. So write whatever and seal it with my ring, my signet. And then everyone will know that these are my words. And the king gave Haman authority to put this plan in place, to get rid of these wicked people, but the king never knew who they were. And so here in this moment, as Esther comes to the king, he has no idea. He is caught off guard by this. So let's start back at verse 3. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. So let's talk about this a little bit. It can be confusing. So what does Esther mean by a loss to the king? So being sold as slaves at least would profit the king, right? If he sold X amount of people to whoever, he would profit off that. But here's what's happening. They're actually just going to be killed. He's going to lose, not profit, and she's appealing to this side of him. Yes, he's already said yes to her. Yes, I will give you your request. He's kind of leaned towards, I'll give you anything you want, up to half my kingdom. That's what he said last chapter, or in chapter 5. And so when she comes there, she should have some assurance that this is going to work out well, but she still plays to this cost-benefit analysis to the king. She gives him the logical reason why, like, listen, if this was just that, then I wouldn't say anything. And again, if this was just being sold to another, they're already slaves here. They're second-class citizens here in Persia. If they were just sent out to somewhere else, to Greece or something else, as slaves, then at least they'd still be alive, and the promises of God could still be fulfilled. But that's not the story. They're about to be annihilated, killed, destroyed. She uses all these words. Let's keep reading, see the king's response. Now, verse 5. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, who is he? And where is he? Who has dared to do this? Can you imagine being the king right now, though? And finding this out? He has no clue. He approved the destruction of Esther, of Mordecai, who he just honored, and all the Jewish people. He doesn't know. The king is human. He's flawed a lot, as we see here. The king has authority, but he does not fully understand what's happening in his own kingdom. Let's contrast that to God's omniscience. Omniscience means God fully knows all things, past, present, future. All things, whether visible or hidden. Nothing catches God by surprise, and nothing escapes his understanding. Unlike King Ahasuerus, God is never uninformed. God is never confused. The king is right now. God is never caught off guard. The king is entirely caught off guard right now. Nothing surprises God. Nothing escapes his knowledge. So point number 2, the character of God. God is omniscient. Trust God because he knows what we do not. When we cannot understand what God is doing, we can still trust that God fully understands what he is doing. God never has to figure things out. God never discovers new information. God already sees the end from the beginning. So trust God because he knows what we do not. Let's start back at verse 5 and pick up our story. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he and who's dared to do this?" And Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. You feel Haman's panic in this moment, right? Verse 7, "And the king arose in his wrath from wine drinking and went into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg for his own life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king." So the king leaves. He kind of storms out in anger. Haman decides to stay and try and beg for his life from Queen Esther. And what we see is another reversal. Right? Haman is second in all of Persia. And let's be honest, being queen sounds good, but in this culture, she's not even allowed to approach the king without an invitation. She was brought in through a harem of women, and God sovereignly allowed her to be queen, giving her this moment. But here, all women in Persia are functionally second-class citizens. And so we see again, God reverse the situation. Let's keep reading it. Verse 8, "And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine. And as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was, and the king said, 'Will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house?'" Let's just pause before the end of that verse for a second. Let's just take notice. We talked earlier about God's sovereignty, often what looks like coincidence. When does the king return? Right when Haman gets too close to Esther, falling down near her. How does the king interpret that? Like Haman is assaulting the queen. Is that true? No. Does God orchestrate that to Esther's advantage? Well, let's keep reading and find out. Verse 8, "And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine. And as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was, and the king said, 'Will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house?' And as the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face." There's a rule in Persia back then that no man was allowed to come within 7 steps of any woman in the king's harem. Nevertheless, the queen. And there's Haman found falling on the couch near her, misinterpreted for sure. But this word falling, earlier in Sunday school this morning, we're talking about literary devices. The word falling here is more than just his physical movement from here to there. Right? It's more than just his physical posture. It includes his emotional and physical change as well as the change in his status right now. As Esther writes this, Haman is free falling in every way. He has been at the pinnacle, second only to the king, and right now he is hoping he can live through the day. Verse 9, "Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, 'Moreover, the gallows, that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high.' And the king said, 'Hang him on that.'" Think about that for a minute. The gallows that Haman built to execute Mordecai will be used to execute the man that wanted Mordecai dead. This isn't a coincidence. This isn't some fortuitous turn of events. This is the power of God revealed through human actions. What we read as a coincidence is written to show us how God orchestrates every single event, even human evil, for his glory and our good. Haman has power. Ahasuerus has authority. Persia has laws. Evil has plans. yet God overturns all of it. God's omnipotence. So God's omnipotence means he possesses all power and authority, and nothing can ultimately overcome God's will. God's omnipotence means no power is greater than God's power. Omni, all, potence, power. Right? Omnipresent, all places. Omniscient, all sentient or science or knowing. Now, omnipotent, all powerful. Let's move on to verse 10. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. And again, here's our third reversal for the day. The gallows built for Mordecai becomes Haman's demise. Haman's not executed for the real crime of plotting the death of Mordecai and an entire people group, but rather the false charge of molesting a queen. Haman ultimately experiences the kind of unjust treatment that he himself helped create. The one who falsely accused others now stands falsely condemned himself. So God's justice may feel delayed, but evil never escapes his authority. So God is omnipotent. Point number 3. Trust God when evil against you appears to be winning. When life is not as we want it, here's what we need to remember. God's omnipresence. Has God forgotten me? No. God is with me and sees me. God's omniscience. Does God know what's happening? Yes. God knows everything, more than we will ever know. God's omnipotence. Is evil winning? No. Evil cannot win. Our God is greater than evil. So trust God when evil against you appears to be winning. Let's restart at verse 10. Let's read that again. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. The passage here has a happy conclusion, but there's a lot left to figure out. What's the unresolved problem we still haven't dealt with here at the end of today's passage? Well, there's still an unchangeable edict signed by the king, sealed with his signet ring, that cannot be undone even by the king, and the Jews are still about to be exterminated. So this passage ends well for Mordecai and for Esther, not so good for Haman, but this unresolved problem still hangs. Our story has been growing to this place where the wayward and disobedient, exiled people of God 2,500 years ago are still about to be killed. The king is still trapped with an unchangeable edict, but if we've learned nothing else, God is more powerful than unchanging edicts. So where does this leave us today? Well, again, looking to Jesus, who is more than a humble Savior. God establishes justice through judgment and deliverance by judging evil and delivering his queen in the story today, which points us forward to Jesus, who will ultimately deliver us from Satan's sin and death. God judges evil and delivers his people. That's the narrative we've been watching. So there's one more story to go. There's one more big piece of the puzzle, but we see this pattern. So where do we finish today? There. Where Jesus, the resurrected Savior, ascends back to heaven with a promise to return. Not just a promise of heaven we all kind of skip to when it gets to be really good, but there's more. When Jesus returns, there is also judgment of evil. Jesus will come and judge all wickedness, right? Again, in Sunday school this morning, the second half of the passage is all about that. Jesus will judge all evil and deliver us from this world. In Psalm 2, it says this: "He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, 'As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill.'" This is how I see God when Haman has a plan. Laughing. Yeah, no. I have a king. His name is Jesus, not Ahasuerus, not Xerxes. I have a plan, and it's not your plan. It's my plan, and my plan always happens. So what applications will you make? How will you apply this to your life this week? What's a takeaway you can go home with? For me, I want to remember that God's character is greater than my circumstances and to trust in who he is, not what I can see. If you're a church member here today, teach others to trust God in every season of life by reminding them of his character, especially when faithfulness feels unnoticed, suffering feels confusing, or evil appears to be winning. Keep our eyes collectively focused on Christ. If you're new to the faith, following Jesus does not mean that life will become easy, but it does mean you will never walk through life alone. Learn to trust who God is, not just the circumstances around you. If you're not a follower of Jesus yet, Jesus invites you to trust the God who is always present, always knowing, and always greater than evil himself. If you are waiting until life is good, you are missing out on God's power. Parents, teach your kids to trust God's character early in life, not just when life feels good. So what's something you will apply to your life this week? Let's kind of get with the folks around you, small groups, because we don't have that much time, and let's share our takeaways with one another.